All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we examine great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, and try to help you to figure out how to best use these things in your life, to highlight their high points and um, focus on their ability to help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5E consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, and your attempts to improve your spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today is the 74th video that we've done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha from Dr. Daniel Ingram. And Ingram journeyed over to the Far East many times to sit in extended meditation retreats and pick the brains of the authorities over there about tapping into their 2,500-year tradition of how this Buddhism thing works, but particularly in terms of Buddhist meditation, or just meditation in general. He classifies two different kinds of meditation: concentration meditation and insight meditation. Concentration meditation is focusing on an object, maybe your breath, or a candle flame, or a red ball, or something. And then also insight meditation, which is opening up to our five senses, those sensations, and also the sensations from our mental impressions, and investigating those sensations for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. Our sensations are not permanent. They arise and pass away. They are not satisfactory. They lead to suffering. And they are not you. They are just there. And the insight meditation, as you do grasp these three characteristics, you move around the states, the cycle of the states of stages of insight. And if you can get through a cycle, you basically enlighten yourself by degrees. Ingram here is talking about, in this chapter, is talking about different Buddhist enlightenment models. So what does an enlightened person look like? What kind of characteristics do they have, and so on? And right now he's investigating what he calls the love models. And we're going to take over right here where we left off yesterday. Plenty of people also imagine that if they get enlightened, then all their romantic problems will be solved, that their love life will be perfect, that they will live in some enlightened state of marital or partnership bliss, since they will have it all together and so be able to handle any of the problems that being in a relationship can bring. Ask any honest spouse about their enlightened partner and see what they say. As far as I know, none would advocate for the veracity of this model, unfortunately. Can realization that has sunk deep and had time to mature help with some aspects of relationships? Definitely. Can plenty of other things also help, like marital therapy, consciously working to acquire mature coping mechanisms, listening well, basic emotional intelligence, cognitive behavioral therapy, and the like? Definitely. Is realization on its own a substitute for all these other things? I don't think so. More sinister, intractable, rarely articulated, and yet compelling is the notion that we will get enlightened, and then people will not only like us, they will love us. Wow, does this dream not withstand reality testing? Take the history of any of the perennial favorite spiritual superheroes, such as the Buddha, Jesus Christ, St. John of the Cross, Rumi, etc., and notice the reactions most people had to them. The idea that somehow you will be embraced, accepted, appreciated, respected, adored, cared for, or even liked by anyone just because of your realization is, tragically, just another beautiful delusional dream. In short, think twice before quitting your day job or walking down the street in your guru outfit, proclaiming your realization for all to love. Okay, you might say, the unawakened might not necessarily like us, but of course, when we are awakened, we will at least get along with other awakened beings, yes? Wow, wouldn't that be nice? I know someone whose primary reason for trying to get awakened revolved around the notion that it would get him the perfect loving relationship with his awakened partner, which, not surprisingly, didn't work out. Unfortunately, it seems just as likely that awakened beings will get into arguments with each other as with other people, particularly around topics that are often dear to their hearts, such as awakening, the strange ironies of life. As no two awakened beings look the same, believe the same things, have the same way of describing their realization, or use terms the same way, communication difficulties, including arguments and not getting along, are common enough. Were that it were otherwise, that awakened beings would at least respect each other. But there are no guarantees in this business, as we are highly tribal mammals with strong territory defense instincts, which often kick in to defend the territory-less territory of awakening. In fact, awakened beings in the wild often display dominating alpha traits that seem the exact antithesis of what the love models promise. Now, it is true that you can borrow a lot of pre-programmed respect from some people just by getting ordained, which, viewed another way, means that ordination might get you the respect that your realization should provide in some idealized universe. However, this will be to a strangely select audience, and the games you must participate in to be part of that group are significant. You can also get a lot of respect by getting on some senior teacher list, but there are subtle forces that then come to bear that may tempt you into denying a lot of your own humanity when in public, thus leading to the shadow sides I mentioned previously. These points also hint at the social models that will follow in a bit. But this section is called the equanimity models. Some ideals of awakening involve an awakened being existing in a perpetual state of perfect equanimity, completely emotionally unaffected by pain, pleasure, gain, loss, praise, blame, sickness, aging, and death, whether one's own or that of others. Often these models seem more like indifference or dissociation models than true equanimity models, since they have agendas for the specific mental state that awakened beings would perpetually manifest, whereas equanimity at its best is a metastate that allows other states equally, without push or pull. In contrast, many of the indifference ideals about awakening seem more like someone who couldn't care less. Awakening is not bound up in not caring. Stories such as the one about a monk smiling contentedly while walking through a battleground littered with freshly slaughtered warriors comes to mind. While this image is not an impossible or necessarily bad scenario, it conveys a sense of otherworldly detachment that also suggests some unhuman heartlessness, some oddly homogenized, sanitized set of possible reactions or total lack of any possible reaction save one of peace and tranquility. These are some dangerous ideals that can cause practitioners to imitate such uncaring or highly detached ways of being, causing disengagement from life and insensitivity regarding this world and those in it. I don't recommend following the dreams these models promote for these obvious reasons. This section is called the no preferences models. Related to the equanimity indifference models are the no preference models. These ideals of awakening generally seem to imagine that you could feed an awakened being excrement, gruel, chicken McNuggets, or top-shelf caviar, and their reaction would be an identical smile or blank expression, as if they would have no tastes, aesthetics, or preferences of any kind. They could have their legs chopped off or left on, no difference. They could wear reeking rags or Armani suits. It is all one to them. You could scream obscenities at them or take them to hear Beethoven. It is all just sounds to them. You could paint their grandmother blue and tie her to a rabid wildebeest. It is just passing empty form to them. These sorts of models have very similar dangers to the equanimity and indifference models, encouraging practitioners to tolerate circumstances that might better have been changed, to remain silent in the face of abuse or injustice, and to try to deny their own actual tastes and preferences, typically producing the sorts of bitter shadow sides and dry, heartless, uptight practitioners that you would expect. These models are the opposite of the love models, since in the love models there is a great sense of appreciation for beings, whereas in these two models there is very much the opposite sort of reaction. This section is called the special models. In the same basic vein as the love models, we have the special models, which specify the degree of specialness that we will have at various stages of awakening, or that promise specialness in general terms, or before even having gained actual realization, just by dint of association with specific spiritual figures or practices. It is nearly impossible for most people to untangle some vague and even specific notion of specialness from the results of clear perception of ordinary sensations, particularly as the various meditative traditions all sell specialness even when they try not to, as even that non-specialness and ordinary mind we find in traditions such as Zen still generally have a glossy sheen of spiritual specialness to them. Because of this sense that awakening will involve specialness, all sorts of complex problems arise. The first problem that I care the most about, being a practice-oriented pragmatist, is that the sense of specialness that we imagine we have or will attain through practice will subtly or overtly separate us from our actual experience in this moment. Many moments don't feel all that special. We are doing the dishes, driving to work, dealing with some angry customer or disturbed family member, washing the funk off our toes, or whatever. We are sitting on a cushion, and our back hurts, our knees hurt, our mind seems a mess, and our practice feels disappointingly ordinary. If we have some ideal that awakening is about specialness, then we may find ourselves subtly or overtly inclining to some imagined special future, to images of special awakened beings, to dreams of how wonderfully special we will be when we finally get awakened. And yet, paradoxically, those ideals in that moment block the very process we feel will make our lives, selves, and practice so special, namely clear investigation of this ordinary reality. This is a serious and pervasive practice problem and needs diligent attention whenever it arises. This specialness becomes a spiritually rationalized form of aversion to our current earthly reality, coupled with attraction to some imagined reality, augmented by the basic delusion that somehow this moment isn't it. A triple whammy of hindrances. Thanks, special. Next, if we imagine that specialness will necessarily pervade the lives of those who are awakened, we may seek traditions, scenes, spiritual friends, and teachers that seem the most special to us based on public opinion and or our own ideals of what special is. Zen is so cryptically, aesthetically special. The Theravada is so starkly, practically special. The Tibetan traditions are so colorfully, magically special. Shingon is so exotically, mysteriously special. We may be attracted to fringe traditions that seem even more special than mainstream traditions just because they seem to be even more uber esoterically extra special, yet down those ultra special rabbit holes we may find forms of special we might best avoid. This specialness can lead to both subtle and overt drawing away from ordinary facts of our life, our ordinary minds, and our immediate experience, which is paradoxically already special and unique beyond belief. Dazzling is the specialness that the various meditation traditions can construct that undermines a recognition of the extraordinary in the ordinary. This dazzling aspect can at once draw people into situations where they find real wisdom and draw them into arrogance, fascination, humorlessness, narcissism, spiritual materialism, sectarianism, and bewilderment just as often. Specialness and intoxicating charismatic displays are double-edged swords. In the West, we tend towards high degrees of individualism and narcissism. When we combine these cultural downsides with these dazzling traditions that are relatively prone to glamorous exaggeration in their myths and advertising strategies, we have a recipe for trouble. Consider the ethical motivation to save all beings everywhere from suffering. This is at once a beautiful aspiration and intention, a high standard that should reasonably keep us extremely humble, and yet potentially a setup for staggeringly grandiose notions in those who misunderstand the explanations about such an aspiration and what that aspiration is intended to affect in our minds. If we identify with something like the Bodhisattva vow, despite warnings in the tradition to reduce and eliminate identification through skillful, balanced practice, and by ignorance, solidify and reify this otherness, skillful aspiration, and think, my self-existent I will personally save all self-existent beings everywhere. Then we are basically asking for trouble resulting from a lack of study of the subtleness of those ideals. Were we to sum the total number of beings who have awakened through the efforts of the Buddha and all of his followers and divide it by the total number of beings who, of all types, who have lived since the Buddha awakened, the number would be so close to zero as to make the idea in practice laughable. However noble the ideal, were you to ask most senior meditation teachers how many of their students have awakened and mastered their practices to the degree that the teachers have, most honest ones would report small numbers, or else the population of great awakened teachers would be very large by this point, and it is not. I realize that the advertising strategies, myths, ideals, and ways of presenting all these ancient practices and traditions arose in cultural contexts, times, and places where perhaps they were skillful and augmented personal and cultural paradigms in ways that made for inspired yet humble practitioners who could practice well and achieve extraordinary results. Maybe medieval yak farming peasants needed a bit of grandiosity to get them through snow-swept nights in freezing caves. Maybe they helped those sitting for long hours alone in sweltering jungles endure malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and ravenous insects. We must respect the extraordinary trials and tribulations that great practitioners went through who mastered and transmitted these teachings in much more difficult times and settings. I can easily wax very grateful and pragmatic, thinking that any advertising or coping strategy that delivered the wisdom to this time and place was worth it. But on further investigation of the workings of religious or spiritual grandiosity in the history of the various meditative sects over the millennia, it might be worth deeply investigating how we frame high ideals, whether those aspirations are reinforcing grandiosity and spiritual narcissism, or true humility and excellent practice, and whether those aspirations have been and continue to be the skillful approach that meets the needs of our time and context moving forward in these very troubled days. There are misunderstandings that are perpetuated within all the schools of Buddhism and all fields of human endeavor based on ignorance, attachment, and aversion. My own take on many of those grandiose notions and advertising strategies created by beings with mixed noble and ordinary mammalian motivations is that they often do not work well in our time and place, and often are often not received or practiced well, and do not often skillfully counterbalance unskillful personal and cultural factors. Instead, I believe that many of those advertising strategies, ideals, and myths, all of which emphasize specialness of tradition, teacher, and methods, can cause serious imbalances, sectarian ignorance, and often exacerbate our already pronounced tendency to take ourselves way too seriously and be way too into ourselves, often to the detriment of our own practice and those around us. Obviously, I'm not free of this either, and here we have evidence that even one who is trying with everything they have to break free of this conditioning can easily fail. Luckily, we have some valuable terms and technologies that come out of modern psychology that may shine light and relative wisdom on what may be serious shadow sides of the meditative traditions. The three patterns that most readily come to mind: narcissism, narcissistic supply, and narcissistic rage. Narcissism, simply defined, is being pathologically self-obsessed, sometimes posited to occur because of not having physical and emotional needs adequately met in early childhood. Modern psychology contains a significant body of very useful and applicable theory about narcissism, most of which applies with scary precision to certain institutional aspects of the various meditative traditions. Any internet search will provide plenty of information on narcissism, and it is no accident that what is likely the most narcissistic age in human history is starting to realize that it needs much more information about narcissism. Narcissistic supply refers to the various pathological interpersonal supports to a narcissist's grandiosity and exaggerated self-importance. Many meditative traditions, sects, and more broadly, many human organizations and institutions, from family units to large corporations, build communities around narcissists and reinforcing narcissistic supply. Narcissistic individuals and communities require nearly continuous doses of narcissistic supply as part of their pathology, with withdrawal setting in almost immediately if that supply is cut off or withdrawn. Thus, when someone becomes savvy to the dynamic and withdraws from participating as a narcissistic supply, he or she will often be scapegoated and demonized. Narcissistic rage is the self-rationalizing, unbridled, and intentionally hurtful reaction that narcissists have when they perceive what is termed narcissistic injury, or more specifically, when their sense of themselves as being special is in any way threatened or called into question, or when their ability to get their own way is blocked, or when those around them fail to meet their lofty standards for how they should treat the narcissist, which generally means praising them and deferring to their entitled and often impulsive demands. In other words, narcissistic rage is the likely result of perceived interruptions or threats to narcissistic supply. Narcissistic rage may arise both in individuals and collectively in narcissistic communities. Did someone with a larger-than-life personality and unusually high standards just metaphorically blow up your spiritual community and alienate one or more consistent and hardworking community members in their unusually large, compelling, and turbulent wake? Is your tradition waging a grand, magical, with a K, war on some other tradition? Is your tradition sure it is the very best, most holy, most perfect, and advanced tradition ever? Consider that these dynamics may contain narcissistic elements. If you find yourself dealing with unusual amounts of angry reactions that seem intentionally designed to wound and exacerbate a situation rather than rationally resolve or calm it, all justified with the most elaborate and lofty spiritual notions, seriously consider that you might be dealing with a narcissistic person and or community, and read up on how to deal with them. It often takes two to tango, so you should carefully examine your own role in the dynamic. But narcissists will happily put all the blame and a suppleness regarding concepts and the truth that may amaze you. I'm sorry, I skipped a line there. Narcissists will happily put all the blame on you and bat away any notions of responsibility with the fluid dexterity of an Aikido master and a suppleness regarding concepts and the truth that may amaze you. Seeing the other side of an issue and taking others' needs into account is not the narcissist's forte, to put it gently, except to the degree that it feeds into their own grandiose sense of themselves. Much of the best advice on how to deal with narcissistic individuals and communities boils down to 3 points. 1, establish and maintain very strong, consistent boundaries. 2, keep to the polite, respectful, and skillful end of the moral high ground. And 3, do your best to minimize or eliminate dealings with the person or group without pathologizing them to others. If you have sincerely owned your own stuff and found no workable or healthy solution, space and distance help greatly. In short, and said in relatively vernacular and non-professional terms, don't let their crazy become your bad day or bad karma. I have read some articles and pieces of advice that involve doing the opposite, such as shouting down a narcissist and mirroring back to them their own toxic behavior when they act out. But I consider this karmically terrible and unacceptable advice, and believe that the other methods are much more ethically sound and skillful spiritually, emotionally, and energetically. Curiously, narcissists will generally opt for negative attention over no attention, so will try repeatedly to hook you into dramatic and entangled interactions. Very little is likely to be gained, and potentially much will be lost by rejoining the narcissist's games. Narcissists habitually, if unconsciously, craft and thrive on situations in which they will win, or at least you will lose. But most importantly, the game and engagement in any form will continue. However, narcissists are often adept at providing something compelling about these dramatic situations, however low yield. So it can take a high degree of self-control psychological insight, and restraint to avoid playing into and exacerbating the drama. There are other personality disorders that can predispose people to unusual degrees of rage out of apparent proportion to what is going on, such as borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. This last one previously termed sociopath and psychopath. Your ability to deal with all these personality disorders will benefit greatly if you read up on the reasons that individuals so diagnosed fly into rages, which vary a bit by the disorder. Luckily, these days there is much useful information on these topics readily available on the web, as we realize that these personality disorders cause a large portion of the drama and chaos in the world. Given the relatively high percentage of people in the population in general and in spiritual communities who have these cluster B personality disorders and traits, learning about how to deal skillfully and compassionately with these people is time well spent. There are many good books coming out on narcissistic personality disorder, and one I recommend is called Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited by Sam Vaknin, V-A-K-N-I-N. A self-diagnosed narcissist. The book, while long, makes for compelling and highly informative reading and treats the subject with rare comprehensiveness and depth. It is a book produced by someone who not only knows narcissism firsthand, but whose grandiosity was turned into a useful service in the form of writing perhaps one of the very best books on narcissism. This apparent paradox illustrates an important point. Narcissists often have multiple unusually positive traits and well-developed talents despite their pernicious tendency to cause destruction in human relationships. When reading Vaknin's amazing book, even the first few pages will likely remind you of many situations you have found yourself in, particularly if you are a narcissist or have codependent tendencies and tend to get wrapped up with narcissists by being their narcissistic supply. Reading about narcissism in general explains a vast range of human phenomena that otherwise would seem to defy explanation, including much of world history, the people that end up running countries, the news, and much of the trouble found in this world at all levels, including the spiritual scandal sheets that never seem to lack juicy material. Okay, we're going to call it quits there for today, and we'll pick up here when we come back next time. So thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.